welcome. Glad you could make it. Tonight, we're here to hear from Theresa Thorud. Thorud. Okay. She has served as secretary of the League Grange for over 10 years. She's a lecturer, which means program director, right? Of the Washington Yamhil Pomona Grange. And she recently was selected to represent Clatsop, Columbia, Tillamook, Washington, and Yamhill counties on the State Grange Lecturers Committee. She has conducted programs throughout Washington County, and now she's here in Multnomah, and we're very pleased. She's done a lot of research on the history of Granges in Washington and Yamhill counties, and she's compiled her findings and donated them to libraries and historical societies. And I'm going to let her tell you the rest about her.
Thank you. Good evening. I found this fitting. The probability that we may fail in the struggle ought not to deter us from the support of a cause we believe to be just. That quote's from Abraham Lincoln, a president who never lived to see the Grange and all its accomplishments. The Grange has its roots in the aftermath of the Civil War. During the Reconstruction era, President Andrew Johnson was anxious to have a survey of the agricultural conditions in the South. This is where a Minnesota farmer by the name of Oliver Hudson Kelley enters the picture. Oliver Hudson Kelley was well known to the people in Washington, D.C. He wrote for farm magazines. He also served as the clerk for a short time to the Federal Department of Agriculture. This is a Minnesota farmer that was going to go south. Imagine a northern person heading south just after the Civil War. Can you imagine the kind of reception he would receive? How's that? Is that better? That's good.
Can you still read your notes?
Yep, I can. Thank you. What made Oliver Hudson Kelley unique was that he was a Mason when he went south, and so he was able to have a cordial invitation. When he was traveling through the Carolinas and Virginia, because of his Masonic relationship, he found that the reception was good, and he was writing his niece, Miss Caroline Hall, while he was formulating an idea of patrons of husbandry. It was his niece that suggested that he allow women full membership into this organization. She told him otherwise it wouldn't survive without the women. The Grange is foremost a fraternal that united farmers and would give them unity and access to share ideas. It was to alleviate the burdens of isolation and to educate and elevate the farmer's standing. With unity and having the ability to communicate among themselves, the farmers soon learned that they could also stand united against the economic hardships placed upon them, stemming from the monopolized distribution of their farm products. The center of their agitation was the railroads and grain elevators. The Grange works from the bottom up. We have a subordinate Grange, which is your community Grange. And then we have a Pomona Grange, which is county level, state, and national. And so the Grange works a lot like your government. And when the Grange was first developing, it had a slow start. But once the farmers felt compelled to unite and start forming co-ops to buy in bulk and reap the rewards for cost-based goods, they let their guard down. And as Grangers formed across the nation, the idea of a secretive farmers' fraternal was being infiltrated. It was being infiltrated by those who stood to lose the most. In his book, The Grange, Friend of a Farmer, Charles M. Gardner writes, "One Grange was organized on Broadway, New York, with a membership of 45, representing a capital of many millions of dollars and composed of bank presidents, wholesale dealers, the likes. And then there was also similar Granges formed in other cities like Boston and New Jersey. The Grange was also for a short time flushed in cash, and they made the mistake of cutting the annual dues to the National Grange in half. With the membership consisting of special interests, the co-ops beginning to fail, and the National Grange watching its treasury dwindle, the membership began to bolt. The Grange was formed in 1867. The peak of its membership was in 1875, when it stood at over 850,000. By 1880, the national membership stood less than 125,000. And by 1889, it was down to 106. It was during the late 1870s, when the Grange was at its peak, that the famous Granger laws took place regarding the regulation of railroads and grain elevators. The movement helped pave the way for passage of the Interstate Commerce Act in 1887. The Grange was also a driving force behind the rural postal delivery, parcel post, postal savings bank. The members also encouraged agricultural studies in schools. They encouraged libraries, good roads, direct election of U.S. senators, truth and fabric laws, pure food and drug, 8-hour week, income tax, and a whole lot more. We're going to look at the West Coast. In California was the first state Grange on the West Coast. It was established in 1873. The farmers there had already tried the co-op route and failed. And the farmers in California gathered in San Francisco May of 1873 with the intent to try and form another union. Mr. Baxter of Napa, California, having himself already appointed as California deputy to the National Grange, addressed the gathered crowd. He was able to convince them the wisdom of forming Granges, and by October there were 104 Granges at the first California State Grange session. In true form, California Grange members formed a Grangers Bank among many of their co-op ventures. The bank was established in 1874 and lasted until 1895. The Grange in California has history, no doubt. However, it's very much alive today. Their biggest challenge this year was to take on the large corporations who contributed to a $45 million campaign against GMO labeling. Proposition 37 failed. But in some small way, the Grange can claim victory. It got people aware of genetically modified organisms. Moving north to Oregon, Oregon State Grange was formed in 1873 also. The State Grange also covered the territories of Washington and Idaho when it first formed. Like many in the early years, they started a patrons bank, a co-op called Northwestern Storage Commission and Shipping Company that went bankrupt, the Lower Columbia Fire Relief Association. Eventually it changed its name to Grange Mutual, and they closed their doors in 2001. Another co-op was a patrons life insurance company, and I think somehow that ended up in Idaho. During the early part of the 1900s, Governor Walter Pierce was a longtime Grange member. He was an advocate for good roads. He had the Grange behind him on good road propositions. But they were up against the Warren Construction Company. They wanted bonds to pave roads before their patent expired on them. And so Governor Walter Pierce and the Grange put up a pretty good fight against the Warren Construction Company, but they lost. Governor Walter Pierce was able to get some farm-to-market roads pushed through, however. And of course, it would be hard to talk about the Granges in Oregon and Washington without mentioning the public utility districts. The rural areas were left largely ignored by the utility companies and began to form co-ops. One such PUD has its roots firmly planted inside of Grange Hall. Their first meeting was inside of Grange Hall. And one such PUD, the fact that today Deer Island Grange meets inside the Columbia County PUD buildings. The Grange has a history of PUDs. And they also have ties with the Bonneville Power Administration. That one would be interesting to find out how many people were actually Grange members that were behind the Bonneville Power Administration. I can tell you Governor Walter Pierce was, and another gentleman that drove around, Arlo Guthrie. And we're going to pause here for a moment to kind of give you an idea of how the Grange works. We're going to look at House Bill 3246. House Bill 3246 was passed in 1999. It's the newborn hearing bill. It had a lot of sponsors, and two of which was the Oregon State Grange and the Soviets Island Grange. The Grange is a cooperative organization, and they have a history of cooperating with other organizations to push bills through. That's what makes them so strong. They're able to communicate and get together with other organizations. This year in Oregon, we all heard about the Grange and all of its promises to help fund schools and other important activities. This Grange was actually using the name without authorization. It was making promises on assumptions. A gambling casino promising $100 million a year. That's $100 million in gambling profits. Fortunately, nobody was ready for that. But let me tell you about the real Grange. In 2011, there was over 170 Granges here in the state of Oregon. With less than 30% of those Granges reporting, over $3 million was donated into your communities, goods and services. These Grange members did that, all on volunteer work. They donated over 5,000 dictionaries to Words for Thirds program. They go into the schools and they give third graders dictionaries. A fairly new program that's been around for a couple of years, it's just getting established, is the Campbell Soup Label program. The Grange members donated over 5,000 Campbell Soup labels. We're talking 2011 in the state of Oregon alone. And less than 30% of our Granges reporting. Can you imagine what it would have looked like if we had 100%? And in addition to the community service, of course, the Grange is a legislative body. And you can go out there into the Oregon State Grange website, the Washington State Grange website, any of those, and go look. They have everything posted out there. They tell you about the Grange, where they meet, what they're doing, their legislative. The National Grange has this little rolling thing you can watch, and it'll tell you all about the Farm Bill and what they're looking at. And we're going to go up north to the state of Washington. A few years back, the Washington State Grange was celebrating the national suffrage. They were celebrating 100 years like we're celebrating 100 years this year. And they had some really good articles about that. And they have, of course, your co-ops. Your Grange Insurance Association, that was part of the Grange Fire Insurance and eventually evolved into the Grange Insurance Association. They're still around. But the question we should be asking ourselves is how many members of the WTC Youth was a member of the Grange? Would they have gotten as much support without the Grange Movement? Because the Grange, again, allowed women into the halls, and they had full membership. They had voting rights. They were able to hold office. Children, over the age of 14, they're considered adults. They can hold office, they can vote. With the Grange, when it first formed, and they had started allowing women into the halls, there was a little bit of opposition. There were some people that didn't like the idea of allowing women into the organization and threatened to discontinue their membership. But in the long run, the founders had to admit it was a good idea to allow women into the Grange. And since we're on the state of Washington, I came across a story that I would like to share with you. On page 78 in Charles Gardner's book, The Grange Friend of a Farmer, he only dedicates about one paragraph to what happened in 1918. And he really doesn't tell you what it's all about, other than the fact that it's titled, "In a Bitter Internal Controversy." It was a trying situation well at hand. But we're going to go to the corner of 10th and Taylor. This is where our story is going to start. Inside this building, right here, that is the Portland Publishing Company. The president was J.L. Wright. And in this building here was the Women of Woodcraft. It's a fraternal organization. That fraternal covered the 9 Western Pacific states, and part of its membership included A.D. Stillman. A.D. Stillman was Governor Walter Pierce's law partner when he was practicing in Pendleton. And Carrie Van Orsendal, she was also from Pendleton. She's the grand guardian of Women of Woodcraft. And Women of Woodcraft in 1917 changed their name to Neighbors of Woodcraft. A.D. Stillman was living in Montana in 1914. And this is the same year the Equity Society was thrown out of their meeting hall during a grain growers meeting. I mention this because the Equity Society was one of a long line of co-ops trying to break a hold on big corporations. Big businesses also held tight onto labor, and any upraising was dealt with in unpleasant ways, such as the 1916 Everett Massacre. This is the same year A.D. Stillman was distributing his book titled Montana Nightmare. With the help of Women of Woodcraft, he was trying to break the hold banks had on farm loans. Had he succeeded, farmers would have had access to farm loans at 5% interest. Now, some of you might be thinking about the Farm Loan Act of 1960. It really didn't do too much good. And we're going to find out why. Mob law wasn't just focused on labor disputes and farmers forming co-ops. In about 1917 or 1918, Jeanette Rankin, a member of the United States Congress, was going to talk about the Third Liberty Loan. She was locked out of a public school building and forced to make her speech in a snowstorm on the streets of Butte, Montana.
Can we ask, what is the Liberty Loan?
The what?
The Liberty Loan that she was giving a speech about.
It is about when farmers wanted to, you mean the 1916, yeah. And it was about having farmers get loans for a fair amount of interest because the banks were charging them exorbitant amount. And it was in 1918 that during the Washington State Grange Convention in the city of Walla Walla, Washington, Grange members were forced to collect donations for the Red Cross outside the public school building. The following day, the Grange members were forced to leave Walla Walla with threat of mob violence hanging over their head. World War I was kind of a trying time for a lot of your fraternals and nonprofits. And just days before the Washington State Grange was ran out of town, Carrie Van Orsedal was sitting in her office on 10th and Taylor when she received a visit from a man in uniform. A captain of the Army representing, he said, the U.S. Army Intelligence Bureau. She had been brought to his attention and that her writing, because she was writing for the Pacific Echo, a paper for this organization, and he told her that they were finding this may have been seditious writing. It wasn't good during World War I. You had to be careful about what you were writing about. And so she handed him a copy of her May issue and challenged him to find anything wrong with what she was writing. And he admitted not to finding anything wrong with it, but he told her that she may not want to write about the Nonpartisan League or Townley, because Townley was a crook, and Townley was ahead of the Nonpartisan League. The captain also volunteered that the federal farm loan law was a failure, and that the demand of the farmers for state loan laws, reasonable rates of interest, free terminal facilities, elevator facilities free of control of the milling combine, cooperative fire, hail, and crop insurance, and other things of importance was socialistic vaporings. A lot of your farmer organizations were trying to break the monopoly of the railroads and the grain elevators. And it wasn't in the best interest for big business, but it would have been for the farmers. And this captain went on to ask Carrie if she was a socialist, and she looked at him and said, "No, I can think too straight." She also went on to say that she could think too straight and not be fooled by the Insurance Federation, the National Council of Industrial Defense, the National Chamber of Commerce, and the National Employers Association. A lot of your fraternals were up against big business. And he basically left her with a warning, letting her know that she should not be writing about the Nonpartisan League and Townley. This was in June. The Washington State Grange was in June. In her July issue of the Pacific Echo, she promptly writes about her whole conversation with this gentleman. She also writes about the Washington State Grange Convention, and she goes on and talks about the Nonpartisan League and Townley. The Oregon State Grange Bulletin also ran a huge article about the Washington State Grange Convention being run out of Walla Walla, Washington. They were also showing support because it was not a very good time. Today, we're reaping the rewards of their hard work. Because of the Grange, we have a lot of laws that have been put into place, and we enjoy them today. And you think about that on your way home. You've got good roads. When you go collect the mail, and you go in the front door and put it down on top of the voter's pamphlet, the Grange has been a driving force behind the women's rights movement. Here in Oregon, we have the income tax instead of the sales tax. The Grange was a driving force behind that. When you turn on your light switch, PUDs, Bonneville Power Administration. You can open up the refrigerator and pour yourself a glass of milk. You can thank a farmer for that. Toast. And then if you scratch the back of your neck, the Grange had also been the driving force behind the truth in fabric laws. So you're going to have that little tag there telling you what that material is made out of. And I challenge you to think what would happen had these halls stood vacant and nobody was there to stand up for the farmers' right. Any questions? Yes?
Could you talk more about the infiltration of the Grange? So it sounded like it was the northern Granges that were infiltrated or created by bankers and all that.
Right,
To
right.
affect the national organization?
Right, because of the Grange was lobbying for the farmer, and the big businesses were finding that, hey, we can't have that, we're going to lose control of this situation. They were joining the Grange. Some of them were forming their own Grange, and when they were forming co-ops, because of these big businesses, as Grange members, they were able to manipulate how things were bought and sold. And it ended up not working very well. A lot of your co-ops failed.
Did the same thing happen in the southern Granges? Or?
From what I've read, I would say it happened all over. Because here in Oregon, I've seen a few co-ops start and they were supporting some of the monopolized businesses around here. Things didn't turn out very good, which is why some of them went bankrupt. Yeah.
I have to say I'm a member of the Grange also. This led to a situation where you had to prove that you were a farmer to be a member of the Grange.
Is that how they kind of crossed over that period?
Right. Yeah, the upshot, the reaction was then to increase the qualifications standards for membership. And therefore, those people who were lawyers or were not tilling the soil were excluded from membership.
Is that still in place?
No.
No, it's basically a family fraternal today. Anybody can join. And you can also have an e-membership. You can go out online and go to the National Grange and become a member and not even have to step foot in the Grange Hall. But then you don't experience the Grange as it's meant to be experienced, I don't think. I really enjoy having the membership and going to the potlucks. Yes?
Could you say more about this Nonpartisan League?
The Nonpartisan League was started in North Dakota, and it was a group of farmers, again, trying to break the monopoly of the railroads and grain elevators. And they really weren't looked upon in a very good light. And I know that the Washington Grange had a lot of Grange members that were also members of the Nonpartisan League. But again, it's just basically a group of farmers getting together and trying to form co-ops. And they were coming up against some resistance.
Co-ops that would like own the elevators, you mean?
Yeah, they were trying to get the elevators and distribution to where they could afford, all they really wanted was to be able to get the product from the farm to the consumer and be able to stay in business. But with the railroads and the grain elevators monopolizing all this, they were losing money. They were borrowing money to grow the crop, and by the time they got that crop to market, they didn't have enough to pay for last year's loan. It was really hard for them.
Was this like in the 1930s when milk was poured out because they couldn't sell it? Say they did that with grain. 1930s and not 1929, something like that.
not sure about that one. I haven't studied that part. I've just gotten to where most of what I've done so far is local, to be honest with you.
So then subsidies are necessary for farmers, huh?
Well, right now I know that the National Grange has got a very interest in the farm loan bill, but I haven't. After World War I know that the Washington State Grange was not happy when the National Grange said, okay, you can move the railroads back to private ownership. And sometimes, we don't always agree sometimes. But the good thing is we work our differences out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have any reflections on the relationship here in Oregon, and particularly in Yamhil and Washington County, between the Grange and organized labor, and if in your research you've come across anything in particular about the Oregon Commonwealth Federation and the relationship between the Grange and the OCF. But I'm especially interested in those counties in particular.
I haven't come across any of that yet. Yeah.
Okay, then I have a follow-up question.
Okay.
What do you know about Granges on the North Coast and how their politics compared with Granges in the areas that you've taken a closer look at? Like Clatsop County area.
Hey, Marilyn, you got anything from that?
I don't know about that. In response to a question raised earlier about subsidies, I do see that there are some differences among the states between what we might call production agriculture, and here we're much more into small family farms and sustainability, and on some issues there is a clash between those two viewpoints.
So you're
So I
saying
don't know.
some of the industrial farmers belong to the Grange too?
Yes. And so they would be more in favor of the subsidies and what have you than, and always, I think, in Oregon, we've been more family farm oriented than in other parts of the country. But I don't know specifically by county.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the philosophy and general principles? That's still not clear to me. Obviously, if they're interested in women's rights, equality is important, but do they allow black people or Chinese to be members? And also, that comment, if I heard it correctly, about socialists not being reasonable, I'm kind of wondering what is the relationship to change in society? Are they more, from what you said, it seemed like a lot of good has happened, but is it part of a general way of looking at the world and wanting a different kind of society? Or is it just, let's make these changes that make our life better, which obviously are important and have a lot of positive ramifications? So I'm still not clear, is this a reformist movement? Is it, when the things that showed action, actually, the slides show them just sitting and having a meal, which is, I'm hungry also sometimes, so it's good action, but I'm wondering so that's my big question. And what do you eat when you have a sneaky?
The Grange is foremost a family fraternal, and they've always had an interest in the best good for the greater good and education. They wanted to see their communities succeed. And as far as food, it's a lot of good food. But yes, they don't really discriminate against any one person joining. And I don't know if we have any left over there, but the National Grange has made this very good timeline. And it shows that they were one of the first fraternals to allow black people in. And we have a diverse group now that are members of the Grange. It did start off as a farmers fraternal, but it ended up basically being a family and community fraternal. Again, anybody can join.
They're all in rural areas, right?
No. It used to be, but now you can find them in the cities too. Yeah. Well, the thing too is you see a lot of farmers markets and things like that in the city. And the Grange doesn't only focus on agriculture. There's tons of committees within the Grange as far as legislative, GWA, community service. The list is endless, and they have a new one, it's the Veterans Committee.
Yeah, but what was the position of the Grange during like the Vietnam War and then now this war, endless war that we have? You know, Iraq. I mean, what, are they politically active in any sense? As we would understand it?
I haven't really seen it.
Well, there was a resolution at the state convention last year to end our involvement as soon as possible in Afghanistan. And this was voted down by the delegates at that particular convention for a variety of reasons. But I think there was a strong veterans group there that thought that should be determined by generals and not by farmers.
Determined by what?
Generals.
Generals.
Right. But the organization is very democratic on issues like this, and as Theresa pointed out, we're a grassroots organization, so a resolution like that originated in a community Grange hall, like the pictures, so we don't just eat, we also talk about issues like this. But the organization is nonpartisan, that is, we do not support any political party or any candidate for office. But we do take stands on various issues. However, it's by majority vote. And therefore, the composition of Granges at different parts of the state, as the young lady was pointing out, may be very different. Jackson County or Josephine County Grange members are very different from Lane County, are different from Washington County, Clackamas County. And to this issue of progressive, I think we have been very progressive, but I also think that's self-serving. In other words, these were issues that addressed problems we saw in our own lives, and therefore we found solutions to those problems and worked very vigorously to get them adopted, not only in our own community, but throughout the country. So in many respects, the organization is considered progressive, and yet farmers traditionally are quite conservative.
I noticed around going up to through Washington, to northern Washington, there seemed to be a lot of Republican effect or influence. Influence around there, and I'm wondering if it just depends on whether somebody Republican or Democrat is that true to the Grange or not.
Well, the Grange would not support the party or the candidate
It's basically
as an
the
organization,
You mean as a matter of policy?
as policy.
Yeah.
Right.
I want to follow on that question. I know now there's an attempt in Oregon to revive fusion voting, the idea that parties will hook up, and the hope is that smaller ones, like the Working Families Party, can provide a vital margin that it could tip things in the way. And the others, they provide the insurance that once tipped, the candidate will hold to the planks of that party. But how did the Grange carry on its politics if it refused to join up with another party? I mean, I read this sheet of successes, including hearing tests and this and that and the other. It may have been true that their principle was that they wouldn't become the captive of a party, but did they become a partner?
That's a good question. I don't think so. Now, the organization has lobbyists, both in Salem and in Washington, D.C. And in the state of Washington, they worked very hard to get the, in the primary, where you're not voting Democrat or
Right,
Republican.
It's an independent
Yes, top
primary,
two.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Do you know what the thinking was behind supporting that?
really, I'm not real sure what their position was, but I know they were successful, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how, let's say the California Grange came out for GMO labeling.
Right.
Would that be possible, I mean, would the National Grange adopt such a thing? And if there was a division amongst, how do they make policy, from the bottom up? How does that work?
Well, the National Grange is meeting right now as we speak in Boise, Idaho. Each state can send 2 delegates, and all the resolutions that were passed by the states are referred to committees of these delegates and then reported on and voted on by all the delegates there. Historically, when I first went to a National Grange Convention, I've never been a delegate, but I've observed, I thought they were not very engaging in debate. Most of that debate, like in Congress, takes place in committees, whereas on our state convention, it all happens right there on the floor and everybody has their say. And in local Grange halls, that's the way it is too. So at the national level, now the current national president is an Oregonian, and so he has accepted a lot more debate than used to occur. He likes the parliamentary procedure part of it. But historically, there hasn't been that kind of open debate.
So what happens if Oregon votes for something?
Yes.
Say, let's say California, because we know that they supported GMO labeling.
Yes.
And then they went to the national, and it was brought there, and it was not accepted.
Right.
Would they still be able to have that position in California?
Yes.
So you have local autonomy.
Right. That is their policy. Right.
I had 2 things that I thought might be of interest to people, just as I've been looking a little bit into the Grange in rural Oregon as well for some research I'm doing on the history of social movements. And one was in talking with some friends that are members of a Grange near Silverton. And maybe you two have heard about this. I'd be excited to hear what your perspective on it is. But they, in their local Grange, passed a resolution in support of the Occupy Declaration from New York. And part of the way they did that, and the impetus for it, was they first read the 1874 Declaration of the National Grange, which is a pretty radical document against corporate monopolies. And there was so much resonance between the 2 documents that the Grange said, we have to pass this. And they passed this. It's one of the members of the Green Granges, which in general are kind of more progressive, I think. But then I think he said, this was Aaron Embry, that they were trying to pass that maybe at the national, or excuse me, at the Oregon.
Right.
So was it put forward this
No,
session?
it was not adopted at the state level.
Uh-huh.
And one of the reasons for that was that I think a lot of people could, it was sort of a smorgasbord of different issues, each one of which could have been its own resolution, and so I might have agreed with 1 and 5 and 9, but not the whole platter of them, and
Yeah.
so it was not adopted. But yes, it is kind of interesting that there is a parallel with that previous document.
Yeah.
Right.
And then one other thing that I found that I thought was really interesting was a resolution that was adopted at the state Grange session in 1873, and it is about a limit to the accumulation of property.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yes, and just to read you a little excerpt of it, it says, "It is declared in our Declaration of Purposes that we desire a proper equality, equity, and fairness, protection for the weak, restraint upon the strong, in short, justly distributed burdens and justly distributed power." That's from that 1874, or at least it must be the precursor of that. In any case, I think I was wrong when I said this was 1873, but I'm not sure. It must have been later. But then, when they adopted this. But then it says, "And whereas we believe the history of the United States for the last quarter of a century has shown that the vast accumulation of property by individuals and corporations has become oppressive upon the great mass of the people, and especially upon the agricultural class," and it goes on a little bit, and then it says, "Resolved, that there should be established a just legal limit to the accumulation of property by individuals or private corporations."
Wouldn't that be good?
Yeah.
So I'm interested, there's been this blossoming of very small farmers and young people and organic farms and this whole new farm movement. Are those people getting involved in the Grange?
Some of them. Yeah. And if you go out there and to the Washington State website, what's kind of interesting is one of their Grange bulletins, they have that all dedicated to co-ops, and they talk about some of the small co-ops in Idaho and how they're selling their products online. So there's a lot of interesting things when you go out there and start reading the different states and their bulletins. It's amazing. It's huge.
That reminds me of my question. Why is only 30% like actually people
Reporting?
Yeah. I was like,
I know, it would be amazing if everybody reported here in the state
It's a
of Oregon.
volunteer organization, and I always say, people volunteer with the very best of intentions, but it's their lowest priority, when you think about it. And so I might agree to be the chairman of the community service committee, and my job is to fill out the report. And yes, I will do that. But my family, my work, my church, come first. And at the end of the day, I ran out of time. I didn't get it done.
Well, yeah, and our community service chairman for the Grange that I belong to, he calls everybody, and that doesn't mean he gets a hold of everybody.
Right.
And it doesn't mean everybody gets back to him.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that we keep track of everything we do. A lot of us have a habit of under-reporting what we really do. And so even if they do get a report from us, chances are it's this much compared to how much we've given. So I don't think you'll ever really get a full picture of how much people really volunteer.
What do you mean by reporting? Reporting what?
Reporting?
Yes.
Well, we go out there and we donate money to various charities. The Grange I belong to, this lady goes to her church and volunteers her time. She goes to, I think it's Haiti or someplace like that, and helps families with their church. These people are phenomenal. They do a lot.
But frankly, part of this is to establish our nonprofit status for tax purposes. And so tracking hours donated, dollars given, miles driven, all help to make sure that we aren't subject to property taxes for the halls. And
This is something like the hospitals do with the poor that can't pay for their bills. They make a list of all the poor people and what they can't afford so that they get a kind of a compensation in one way or another through tax or something like that.
Well, here we're just saying this is the community good that we do, and therefore the building remains tax-free. Yeah.
Would you say that the Grange is growing throughout the U.S. right now?
No. I think we're holding our own. But if you've read the book Bowling Alone, people are not joining groups in general. And this is a trend that has been going on now for, a decade or more. And so I think that we've had a problem with membership. I see that it's kind of turning around as we've made more effort to become more community-oriented. And by that I mean identifying what this community needs versus doing what we're good at doing. Because historically, we were the people who had the spaghetti dinner, or we're the people who did this kind of community service. And now I think we're much better at identifying, well, what does the community really need, and how can we deliver that? And that then tends to draw more people into the organization. But like many organizations, and fraternal organizations in particular, our age range actually is pretty good, but still skewed to 80-year-olds. And I keep saying, and I'm not there yet, but if I invite my friends to join, what have we accomplished? We've increased the numbers, but not the longevity of the organization. And so, actually, we have a good youth group, but where we are lacking are in the 40 and 50-year-olds.
I have another question. It sounds to me like one of the glories of the movement was it combined on the one hand the kind of emotional warmth of a social organization where people were friends and family and they had the common stewardship of a place. And then on the other hand, you had this greater aspiration of changing the system of economy and government so that you could preserve family wage on the family farm. Do you think that second part, the more political agenda, has disappeared? And that may be one of the reasons that people are feeling alone.
First of all, a very good statement of what the organization is, a dichotomy, yes. And yes, I think that is one of our issues, is that we really haven't, in the state of Oregon, had a foe until we had this casino who decided to call themselves the Grange and stole a registered trademark.
Right, well, yeah, that kind of seems kind of...
Right.
They registered it, or they took or they tried to appropriate yours?
No, it's a registered trademark
Right.
of the National Grange, and
Yeah.
they just decided to take it.
And it is copyrighted now, isn't it?
No, it's a registered trademark.
It's
So they would have had a lawsuit that they probably would have lost.
Yes.
Except,
Right.
I assumed that you didn't sue them and you made this accommodation with them because they're so huge and you don't have their resources to
And
fight them.
The more important factor in my view was that if we took them to federal court, we might just be getting the case heard now, after the election.
Yeah, right. Oh,
And
for
so
sure.
we would have spent a huge amount of money
Right.
in that process.
Yes, fortunately, it turned out to not really matter.
Exactly.
But I want to bring it back. Do you think the spirit changed? I mean, you got this long view from being a member for many years. Was there more of a sense that the Grange could be, a kind of shield for farmers against what went wrong in the economy, and now it's no longer?
I think that's probably very true. And I'm just remembering my own childhood. I grew up in a Grange family. And the dinner table discussion was about issues that the Grange was fighting. We weren't farmers, my grandparents were, and my aunts and uncles were, but, and for us, it was the public power issue, because we lived on the coast, and we're not, and out of town, and we're not served by a power company, and therefore had very undependable power service in the winter. And so the Bonneville Power Administration was one of my dad's biggest issues. And I heard about it every night at dinner.
Can I ask where on the coast this was?
North Bend.
Okay, because my family has a home in Tillamook County.
Okay,
And we have a Tillamook County PUD.
yes, yes.
You know, with an elected board. In fact, one of my friends is on the board.
Mhm.
And it's, yeah, and you get this wonderful little magazine when you belong to the PUD that's about all these, you know, other rural, I mean, it's basically rural.
Yes.
And although Seattle has public power.
That's right.
And we tried that in the 70s, I think.
Yes.
Here. And we're unsuccessful, unfortunately.
Right, right.
Yeah, so I've always been very interested in public power. So what exactly did the Grange do around public power?
Just a lot of signature gathering and discussions and what have you. I don't.
Only word of mouth.
Yeah.
Lots
Right.
of discussion.
Right.
There's a lot of people. So if everybody's talking to 2 or 3 people, that's reaching a lot of people right there,
Yeah.
just with communication.
Right.
Was it Gus Norwood wrote about the Washington State Grange in his history book, and he talks a lot about the PUDs in that.
Are they, is the Grange active in trying to shape the policies of the Bonneville Power now? I mean, because I'm sure that's an ongoing discussion about how that's all run, right? I mean, it is still a kind of cooperative, I think, or something.
Right. But, you know, I've not heard that discussed at all.
Mm.
And so I think the point that he was making is that, yes, maybe we have become less of a vital force on some of these issues
Mm.
compared to what we were at one time.
And I think they were against Enron at one time. They had that out on the state floor.
That's a nice thing to be against.
Yeah, yeah, but that, again, that was a while back, and needless to say, nobody listened to us.
This is something I'm kind of interested in. Anybody can join the Grange, but how about some of these huge corporate farmers? Do they ever go on there? I don't know, they aren't really people, they're corporations. So you answer, please. Your ball.
Well, if you were to, whether you're one of those people or just yourself, to apply for membership, it would be by vote of the members in your local Grange. And so if we had reason to suspect that you were one of these huge corporate interests that we tend not to agree with, we might not accept you. Right. But in general,
Exclusive organization.
but in general, back to his question, the Grange does not discriminate. And I don't know the last time that somebody's been voted down, because we're desperate for members, and if you're gonna pay your dues, we'll probably accommodate you somehow.
But if I went to Iowa, where you have these vast, you know, industrial corn farms, and might they dominate the Grange there?
Yeah.
Those farmers tend to belong to the Farm Bureau,
Farm Bureau, not the.
or the Farmers Union.
You've heard that phrase, anybody can be a member, but not everybody.
Yeah.
Does the Grange still, are they still an organizing faction for healthcare and insurance and stuff like that for people? Is that maybe a motivator for people to join the Grange as well?
Not as much as it was at one time. As Theresa mentioned, the Grange Insurance Association still is active in Seattle. And I know that they insure a number of Grange halls for fire and liability. But I don't know too many people who have Grange insurance here anymore. My mother was an insurance agent for them, and that paid my college education, so I have fond memories of GIA. But and health insurance, no, and we've at various points members have urged there to be some kind of coverage, but the pool is too small and the ages are too old to make it practical.
Which is why we lost the one here in Oregon, because it was for Grange members only, and it was limited to Oregon.
Right.
And so you didn't have enough people to be a member to keep it going.
And once people are on Medicare, they don't really need it anymore.
That's right.
Yeah. The supplement.
Right.
Yeah, but
we,
it's, you can get a supplement. It's not like being an independent
Right.
person under 65 looking for health insurance.
Right.
Looking for a
But
supplement.
historically, having that kind of coverage was a great attraction of members, and especially the fire insurance being out in rural areas where there would not be good fire, there were volunteer fire departments if anything existed. It was high risk, and a lot of other companies wouldn't want to cover you because you lived way out in the boondocks.
yeah, they found it hard to find coverage, and so that's why they had co-ops.
Yeah, his hand up again first.
I guess this is to Theresa, but anybody really.
That's Maryland.
It sounds like, you mentioned that, from time to time through that little historical sketch, that there were, they did cooperatives here and there. It sounds like at some point powerful people tried to use the cooperative model to do some market shenanigans or things like that. But overall, the Grange seems to have done cooperatives quite a bit through its history. Is that, or do they still do? I mean, do they still do that in any way, or is it, and all the sort of collapses that you mentioned, were they the result of just market failure, or I mean, is the cooperative model that didn't work ultimately, or I guess I'm not being that precise, but I'm just trying to figure out kind of where the contour of that.
Well, I think it depended upon the situation too, but yes, you still see a lot of co-ops that were originally formed by Grange members, but then they just kind of went off in a direction. They still have, that Grange, there's a Grange co-op down in Southern Oregon.
Yeah,
too.
there's one in Medford and there's one in Coos Bay. But you don't have, I don't know about the one in Medford, the one in Coos Bay, you don't have to be a Grange member to purchase there. But it is owned by those who participate. So,
Not by the Grange.
not by the Grange.
Right.
The Grange organizes.
Right, and so I know my uncle would get a kickback from buying all his feed there and tires and whatever else for the tractor and whatever. I think maybe some of these false starts were the lack of any business knowledge, training. These people were generally not educated and aware of the laws of supply and demand and economics and
There was a farmer's co-op gas station in Tillamook.
yes,
Until just a few years ago.
right.
And it was very competitively priced for me, who wasn't a member either.
Right.
And believe it or not, Montgomery Ward's was also started as a co-op, for Grange members.
Really?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting when I found that out, yeah. So there were various co-ops that formed.
So, and there were two forms of co-ops, cooperative buying and then cooperative selling.
Is there, has there been a comprehensive history of the Grange that you recommend?
There's a lot, it just depends on what you're looking for, because a lot of them wrote about the Grange, and you have a lot of different, the Grange is so huge. You could read tons and tons of books and get a different perspective.
But I would just mention that the National Grange has just released, I think it's 5 ebooks. And
Charles Gardner.
yeah, the Friend of the Farmer is probably the traditional one. I don't remember the titles of the others, but they're all.
So it's a history of the Grange overall?
Right, yeah.
Right. Yeah, there are 5 different books.
Yeah.
There is not one of the state of Oregon.
No, there's one for the state of Washington.
Yes.
What was that, the title again?
Friend of a Farmer.
Oh, Friend of the Farmer.
Yeah, and if you go out there on the National Grange website, it will show you the books that they have available. And the author is Charles M. Gardner.
So all the delegates and everything you were talking about, they're all voted, they all got voted into the positions that are?
For the state Grange convention, it would be whoever is the leader of the local Grange and spouse. Or now that we have many who are not married, they can elect a second delegate. Or if the leader cannot attend, then they just elect people who could go. And at the national level, it would be the state president and spouse or a second delegate. And the one variation on this is that if a state has fewer than 15 Granges, you only get 1 vote. Which would be true of Alaska and Nevada.
Does the West Coast communicate at all with the East Coast?
I think so, and you'd be interested to know that probably Washington is the strongest Grange state. Pennsylvania would be strong, New York, and I think Oregon and California are right up there.
So when you say Pennsylvania, I think of the Pennsylvania Dutch.
Yes.
And is that something that are they involved in the Grange? Or?
Not to my knowledge.
It might not be so. Maybe
yeah.
an association, I don't know.
Right. Not aware.
Because they certainly find.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned before the National Grange Association that's happening, or session that's happening in Idaho right now.
Yes.
And I think I heard something on the radio that one of the things that was being considered is what is around the H-2A, the guest worker program for
Yes.
immigrant agricultural. And I'm wondering if you had discussions about that in your own Granges and what some of the conversation was like.
Not that I heard, but that there was a resolution at the convention about sheep herders. And I think that was mentioned in that OPB
Yeah.
article yesterday.
Uh-huh.
So that resolution came from Oregon. And I'm not real clear on what it was, but I think we were in favor of that. But it wasn't an issue that I was really tuned in on.
It'd be out there on the website.
Yeah, it is on the website, right.
For the national or the Oregon?
On Oregon, on the front page at the very bottom, there's a link to a PDF of the resolutions that were passed at our convention.
Okay.
And it just gives the resolved parts of it.
It's time to start recruiting.
Well, you know, there has been a college Grange at Oregon State, It didn't last very long because the problem is that the turnover rate is real high. And I think they've tried it at Penn State University as well. Right, if you're interested, we could fix you up with a Grange.
And it's real easy to find them. Again, you just go out on the Oregon State Range website, and they have local ranges. Isn't that the little button up there?
Find a
What is it?
Grange.
Find a Grange. And again, a lot of people, they're finding our internet, so they have internet membership. And they also have Twitter, Facebook, and that
TeamSpeak.
TeamSpeak. So they share a lot of information that way too.